After being missing for 9 days, the body of this 4-year-old girl was found inside of her bed. Paulette was born in Mexico to a well-off family. She had developmental issues that her family struggled with, but Paulette had 2 nannies to kind of help give her parents a break. Then in March of 2010, Paulette disappeared from her bedroom in the middle of the night. There was no evidence of anyone breaking in. The family lived in this really nice apartment building. Surveillance footage showed no one coming or going or Paulette leaving. 5 days after Paulette went missing, her mother Lizette did a very long TV interview from Paulette's bedroom on Paulette's bed, which is quite eerie and confusing considering only a few days later, Paulette's body was found in her bed, wedged between the mattress and the bed frame. This was officially ruled as an accident. The story was that Paulette had rolled in her sleep, wedging herself accidentally between the mattress and the bed frame, and she couldn't pull herself out, couldn't breathe, and unfortunately passed away. And I'm sure you're picking up on the fact that there is quite a few red flags here. The most obvious being that her mother had just done that lengthy interview from Paulette's bed. There's a camera crew, a production team in Paulette's bedroom. No one saw or smelled anything. Also, this was a huge case. Extensive searches were being done. Plenty of people were coming from in and out of her bedroom, and no one found her in the bed. Personally, I would be really concerned if my police department couldn't find a missing person that disappeared from their bed in the bed. So reportedly, during the 9 days that Paulette was missing, not only did the family members sleep in Paulette's bed at least once, but the nannies had also changed the sheets on Paulette's bed at least once. There's no way in hell that you could convince me that they pulled the sheets over the corner of the mattress and didn't see her. Tried to do a demo to show the people that were questioning that this was actually possible to make the bed and not find her, but there's too many what ifs in this case for me, too many people going in and out of this room. Everything I'm gonna say from here on is complete speculation. I find it very unlikely that Paulette was in her bed the complete 9 days that she was missing. It's been theorized that Paulette's mother, Lizette, was frustrated with Paulette's disability and possibly snapped. I also want to point out that one of the lead investigators on this case originally did suspect Paulette's mother, Lizette, but then out of nowhere changed his mind, said case closed, it was an accident, and stopped answering any questions about the case. Was this a police cover-up? Did Lizette, who was wealthy, pay them off? I'm really interested to see all your guys' thoughts, theories, and questions when it comes to this case. I swear you guys are always coming up with connections and theories that I would never put together in my brain. Please keep dropping your case suggestions in the comments. Remember, I'm going to be batch filming a lot of videos in the next couple days because I'm going to be in Paris in less than a week, so I need a lot of videos so I can post while I'm still there.
This soldier came home to reconnect with his mom, but his life ended up being taken in a fake ritual. 20-year-old Joshua Bennett was in the U.S. Army and was just days away from deploying to Iraq. He had returned home to Illinois to attend his father's funeral, and when he was there, he wanted to reconnect with his estranged mother who had abandoned him and his father when he was young. To his surprise, she was there at the funeral, and she invited him to go spend time with her at her home that she shared with her boyfriend in Claremont. Joshua agreed, and he just really wanted to know the woman who had left him behind and wanted to close that chapter before leaving to war. When Josh arrived at the home, it was more crowded than expected. In the home, his mother's boyfriend lived there along with his son Jackie and Jackie's pregnant girlfriend Lindsay Cassinger. At that point, Josh didn't really care, he was just there to see his mom. That night, Joshua and his mom sat in the kitchen eating chicken wings, just talking for hours, and it was really peaceful. What Joshua didn't know was that his mom, 34-year-old Irina Kotner, was a part of a coven. There was 3 members of that coven, and it was Irina, David, and Rick. She told those men that 16-year-old Lindsay Cassinger was cursed and that they needed to use her for a ritual. Yes, Lindsay is the girlfriend of Irina's boyfriend's son, Jackie. She gave those men a sacred tool for the ritual and gave them her blessing. Those men, Rick and David, self-proclaimed warlocks, received their final instructions and headed into the night. In August of 2005, Rick and David parked outside of the home that Irina gave them. They wore gloves and ski masks, and their plan was to go through a window, surprise Lindsay, and do this sacred ritual that they were told to do. But this wouldn't go as planned. As David was climbing through the window, the family dog started barking uncontrollably. Irina was alarmed, so she ran into the kitchen and saw the men and screamed. David fell through the window and Rick followed him, and it was pure chaos. David lunged at Irina, stabbing her in the chest, and kept saying, "I bring you forth from the dark." Eventually, Joshua was awoken by the dogs and the screaming, so he ran to the kitchen and saw that his mom was being attacked. David turned and stabbed Joshua in the chest, and Rick sprayed him in the eyes with pepper spray. Joshua stumbled, fell, and began to suffocate. Meanwhile, Lindsay, the one that they wanted to do a ritual on, fled to a neighbor's house. Her boyfriend Jackie grabbed a shotgun and ran upstairs. Rick tried to stab Jackie, but he missed and stabbed himself in the leg. Jackie grabbed the shotgun and aimed it at the two men and pulled the trigger. The home was pure chaos. David collapsed on the floor, Irina was on the floor gasping for air, Joshua was basically dying, and Rick fled the home. Rick ran all the way into the cornfields and called Irina. When she answered the phone, she sounded cold, angry, didn't want to talk, and then Rick heard the sirens. For the next few days, investigators pieced everything together, and Irina had invented everything. 16-year-old Lindsay was never cursed, and Irina just made that up. Irina had once dated Jackie, her boyfriend's son, and when he left her for a younger woman, she wouldn't accept it. Her jealousy consumed her, and she fabricated the idea that Lindsay was a dark witch who cursed her. Irina then created a coven and told her followers they were on a quest to fight evil. She also told them that Lindsay's unborn child was also cursed, and they believed her. Sadly, Joshua was pronounced dead at the scene, and he never made it to Iraq. David died as well, and Irina survived. Rick ended up pleading guilty to murder and was sentenced to 20 years. Irina was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 57 years in prison. Joshua came home looking for family, but instead he became a victim of a fake curse and jealous lie.
This is one of the most disturbing cases that I've ever heard of, and it could have been prevented. This is 17-year-old Georgia Williams. On May 26, 2013, she was brutally murdered by a man who claimed to be her friend, but in reality, he was a predator who was obsessed with snuff films. The friend in question was 23-year-old Jamie Reynolds. That night, at around 8 p.m., Jamie asked Georgia to come over to his house in Telford, Shropshire, because he needed help with a photography project. It wasn't a secret that Jamie wanted to become a photographer, and he had even previously taken photos of Georgia's friends. She felt that it was a little awkward that he asked because he had already asked her out multiple times in the past in which she politely declined. But on that night, she agreed to walk to his house to pose for a few photos, and that would be the last time that she was ever seen alive. Georgia was reported missing the next day after failing to return home, and police immediately went to Jamie's house. Neither Georgia or Jamie were there, but what they did find is extremely chilling. Authorities found a digital camera containing horrific images of Georgia standing on a box with a rope around her neck. Once there, Jamie kicked the box out from underneath her and filmed and took photos of her final moments struggling to breathe. Once she was dead, Jamie sexually assaulted her body before dumping her in the woods. It would then take 2 weeks for authorities to locate her body. Jamie was quickly arrested, and what police found at his house is horrifying. Authorities found a list with the names of 32 girls that he knew that were all possible targets. They also found a series of stories about killing girls in which he planned to reenact. Most chilling of all, though, is a story that police found titled Georgia's Surprise, in which he detailed all of the horrific things that he did to her. What's infuriating is that this could have all been prevented. Jamie had an extensive criminal history dating all the way back to his teen years. He was known to be extremely creepy towards women from a young age and owned a large collection of snuff films, which showed women being murdered. He would even go on to tell police that he was turned on by strangulation. He was first arrested as a teenager, and a doctor determined that he was a significant risk to others, but nothing was done. He was arrested once more for trying to strangle a girl, but again, he was released. Jamie would also Photoshop pictures of girls he knew to show them being hanged, and his dad even reported this to the police, but they didn't take any action, and they never informed any of the girls in the photos of what Jamie was secretly doing. Jamie was also arrested in 2011 for hitting a girl with his car after she rejected him, yet police let him off with a traffic warning. All of this combined should have been enough for police to know that he would escalate, yet it seems like they really just didn't care. What's incredibly sad is that Georgia's dad was a detective with the West Mercia Police, but he retired after she was killed. Her parents have gone on to say that they still have nightmares to this day over what happened to their daughter.
She is America's youngest female to be sentenced to death. Krista Gilpike was born to her mother Carissa and her father Emil in Beckley, West Virginia. Her parents were negligent and never really paid attention to her, even when they received the news that their toddler was suffering from severe seizures. When Krista was younger, she was abused by a family friend, and it really affected her demeanor and behavior. Eventually, she was raised by her grandparents, whom she loved very much. Years would go by and Krista's grandparents passed away, and this deeply affected her because she was so close to them, and it got so bad that she even started harming herself. Eventually, Krista had to move back home with her mom, but they did not have a good relationship at all. Her mom would have a steady flow of bad men coming to the home attempting to abuse Krista. Krista met Colleen Slemmer in Jobs Corp Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she was described as a nice and caring person. The two girls were not friends, and Krista started to get jealous of her because she believed that she was trying to steal her boyfriend from her. At one point in the school year, Krista went on vacation to go visit some extended family while her boyfriend stayed behind. Krista's boyfriend was lonely without her, so he would hang out with his friends while she was gone. Her boyfriend ended up hanging out with Colleen, things got physical, they ended up hooking up while Krista was gone. While the two never told Krista what actually happened, she had her suspicions. Krista's suspicions grew stronger, and she was driving herself crazy because she had no solid proof that they were hooking up, so she decided she was going to make peace with Colleen. Krista offered some weed to Colleen and told her she had it stashed in the woods, but this was a trick to get her out into the woods, and she wanted her revenge. On January 12th of 1995 at 8 p.m., Krista, her boyfriend, Colleen, and a mutual friend named Shadala Peterson headed out of their dorms and went to the woods. Colleen thought they were all going to the woods to get high, but that was far from the truth. Once they got far enough into the woods, they were in a remote area, there was no one around for miles, and that's when Krista decided she was going to confront Colleen. Krista confronted Colleen about trying to seduce her boyfriend, but Colleen was quick to deny that anything had happened between them. That's when Colleen realized they were not out in the woods to get high and have a good time. Krista and her boyfriend both had meat cleavers and box cutters. Another friend with them, Shadala, was just acting as a lookout. Krista then lunged at Colleen, grabbed her by the head, and kneed her in the face. She then threw her on the ground and repeatedly kicked and punched her. At this point, Colleen was fighting for her life. She was lying in the mud, sobbing, saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" At one point, Colleen got up and tried to run away, but didn't make it too far once Krista caught up to her and sliced her back with a box cutter. The next hour, Krista continued with the attack. Krista's boyfriend even joined in and used a box cutter to carve a pentagram in Colleen's chest. At this point, Colleen had shallow breathing and she was basically drowning in her own blood. After an hour, Krista grabbed a huge chunk of asphalt, threw it at Colleen's head, and it ended her life. Krista and her boyfriend dragged Colleen's body onto a pile of dirt and left her there, and grabbed a piece of her fractured skull and kept it as a trophy. They also grabbed Colleen's ID so that if someone were to find her body, it would be hard to identify her. Once it was 10 p.m., the three got back to their dorms and Krista went to go visit a friend. The friend stated that Krista was in high spirits, she was singing, dancing, jumping, and just happy. Krista ended up telling her friend everything she had did and even showed her her trophy. The very next day, Colleen's remains were found by an employee of the University of Knoxville. Krista also tried to go back to the crime scene, but she was denied access, and she had even left her jacket inside one of her classrooms, and inside of that jacket she had pieces of Colleen's skull. An office admin had found that jacket with a piece of the skull and turned it in to police. All three students were arrested, and Krista admitted to everything. She gave a long and thorough confession, which ended up being 42 pages long. Once they were in court, Krista's defense team claimed that she was suffering from mental illness ever since she was a child. They did this to hopefully reduce her sentence, but she showed no remorse. March 22nd of 1996, just a few hours of deliberation, Krista was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury recommended the death penalty for Krista, and she is currently incarcerated in Tennessee. As for Krista's boyfriend, he was also found guilty and given a life sentence, and their friend Shadala was given a much lighter sentence.
There was blood smeared all over the house. One officer even said it was the most horrific crime scene he'd ever seen. The torture this woman went through for weeks is absolutely barbaric. It was the early 90s in Hattersley in England. Kellyanne Bates was a 16-year-old girl who lived in the area with her mum, and she lived a super normal life. She liked school, she was pretty sporty, and she wanted to become a teacher. In 1994, Kellyanne was working for a graphics firm just to make a little bit of extra money for going to college. She just enrolled on a teacher training course and things were looking up. From the outside, things looked totally normal, but nobody had any idea what was going on behind closed doors. When Kellyanne was just 14 years old, a literal child, she met James Smith. Now, he wasn't a fellow teenager, he was actually 32 years older than Kellyanne. I think they just happened to bump into each other. It was like a cruel twist of fate. They bumped into each other and he just decided to groom her. Kellyanne had no idea about his disturbing past. He'd actually been married twice before and was an incredibly violent, aggressive man. He was super jealous, super controlling, and he'd actually physically beaten up his exes. In the 70s, he dated a woman called Tina Martin, and in a violent outburst, he'd held her head underwater in a full bath. She said he was a total nightmare to be around, and he basically used her as just a punching bag. So once Kellyanne got to be 16 years old, apparently James said to her, like, it's okay, we can be public about our relationship. We don't need to keep it secret anymore. So Kellyanne told her parents, and they were absolutely horrified by the age of this man. And this was a quote from her mum. It's actually so chilling. She said, as I walked in, he swaggered down the stairs and it made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. He was so much older than I expected and looked a bit like John Denver, but he was smarmy. He said, nice to meet you at last, and all I could think of was how I wanted to get rid of him. This wasn't the man I wanted for my daughter. I vividly recall seeing our in the kitchen and wanting to pick it up and in the back. I thought about it many times. Sadly, Kellyanne's mum's intuition about James was totally right. Soon after, Kelly actually moved in with James in Gorton in Manchester. And as time went on, Kelly became more and more withdrawn and was spending less time with anyone but James, which is so classic in a DV relationship. If people would occasionally see Kellyanne out and about, she would always have marks on her, but she would make excuses as to what the marks were, like, oh, I just walked into a door. Margaret, the mum, actually noticed these marks when she did occasionally see Kellyanne, and she actually spoke to the police about this and tried to report it, but all they did was give her some leaflets and say, like, basically she's 17 now, so she can do what she likes. And heartbreakingly, Kellyanne just became more and more withdrawn, and she ended up even quitting her job. This was what James wanted. He didn't want her having anything to do with anyone but him. It was so obvious she was being controlled, even on the phone. She just sounded different, you know, when someone just like loses their spark. In April 1996, his violence reached a sickening new level. On the 16th of the month, James walked into a police station and casually announced he'd killed his girlfriend. Obviously, the police were totally stunned and asked what he meant, and he really tried to make out like this was a terrible accident. He said the pair had had an argument while she was in the bath and she accidentally drowned. So they obviously headed straight over to the crime scene to see what the hell had gone on here. But when officers turned up, it was totally different to how James described. I don't know how he thought he was going to get away with this, but one of the officers actually said it was the worst crime scene he'd ever seen in his policing career. Blood was smeared all over the house, and Kellyanne was just in an absolutely awful, awful state. The pathologist found she had over 150 injuries. You do not get that from just drowning by accident in a bathtub. They also deemed these injuries to have taken place for over a month. Now, the true horror of what Kellyanne went through is absolutely unimaginable. I don't know how a human would do that to another human, so please be warned before you carry on watching. She'd been tortured for weeks up until her death. James had starved her, tied her to a radiator by her hair, and beaten her. She'd been burned with an iron, strangled and stabbed. She'd been scalped, so basically like the hair ripped out of her head. And she'd also had her eyes gouged out by this man. And this apparently was at least 5 days before she died. I just can't imagine the horror. Obviously, he was arrested. It was very clear that this was a very sick individual, and he was taken to court for the murder. Other brave victims of James actually came forward and testified against him. James tried to argue that he was the real victim. He said, she put me through hell winding me up. He said she'd purposely bump into things to make it look worse on him. And it's like, okay, so she tied herself to the radiator, did she? She burned herself with an iron and she drowned herself in the bathtub. In 1997, he was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. But honestly, I don't know what you guys think. Do let me know in the comments, but I don't think any sentence would be long enough.
After hearing what this woman endured, you won't be able to sleep tonight knowing that her killer is still out there. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Patricia Granger. In 1997, Patricia, also known as Pat, was a young mother living with her parents and her son on Buchanan Road in Sheffield. Despite being 25, Pat actually had the mental age of a 10-year-old, and it was suspected that she had ADHD, although this was never diagnosed. Growing up, Pat had faced hardships. Along with her lower mental age, she actually had problems with her hearing, but she would refuse to wear a hearing aid as that would only accelerate the bullying that she was already experiencing. She would be relentlessly bullied and picked on from not only children but fully grown adults as well. She couldn't even sit outside the front of her own house without being spat on. On the 10th of August 1997, a group of children who were playing around the Sheffield Lane Dyke, locally known as the Brook or Tongue Gutter, would find the body of a woman lay in the stream. The body found would be identified as Patricia Granger, who by this point had been missing for 6 days, and what she endured potentially during that time is nothing short of torturous. Patricia had been raped and sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed multiple times all across her body, mutilating her. Her breasts were mutilated, having one of her nipples cut off, and her intimate areas were also mutilated. It was clear that she had been the victim of a brutal beating, having bruising all over her body, and she had been strangled. During her autopsy, there were no sign of defensive wounds found, so Patricia hadn't tried to fight off her killer. Was it because the killer was someone that she trusted, or did she not have the mental capacity to know that what this person was doing to her was wrong? Also, during her autopsy, water from the stream was found in her lungs. This horrifyingly proved that Pat had been alive through the rape and the torture and the beating, and that she had died after being dumped at the stream. Had the killer tried to drown her? Had they left her there for dead? Did they think that she was already dead? Was the divan bed frame placed on top of her to conceal her or to prevent her from escaping? Throughout their inquiries, the police would learn that throughout the 6 days that Pat was missing, she had been seen several times in the close proximity of her home, kind of a mile one way or a mile the other. But no one knew who she was with or where she was immediately before her death. A witness would recall seeing a man nearby the stream at around the time that Pat is believed to have been there and died. The witness gave police a description, and with that description, they created this photo fit. Over the years, there have been several arrests, however, all have been released, and police still do not know who murdered Patricia Granger. In 2012, investigators were able to retrieve 2 partial DNA samples that were found underneath Patricia's fingernails. So had she tried to fight back? Was this her only way of trying to fight back, scratching her killers? The DNA belonged to a man and a woman, but again, they are only partial. Pat's case is still active and very much kept alive by her son, Danny, who from the age of 16 has advocated for his mother and has been her voice. And he is desperate for justice to be brought for his mother. You can go ahead and visit his website, www.whokilledmymum.com, where he goes into the case extensively. He gives updates now and then, and he quite often still posts, even though this website has been up since 2008. So definitely check this out. This year will mark 27 years since the murder of Patricia. She should be 52 now and enjoying a life with her son. However, that was ripped away from both of them, and her killers have never seen justice. If you have any information about the murder of Patricia Granger on the 10th of August 1997 in Sheffield, you can contact Crime Stoppers with your tip.
She wasn't out here murdering people for love or revenge or even survival. No, she was murdering people so she could go shopping. It was February 1994 in Riverside County in California when a disturbing call came in to police. 86-year-old Norma Davis had been found dead inside her home. Now, she was an elderly lady. She lived in a gated community, and this wasn't an area that had high crime rates, so this really baffled investigators. Another thing that was absolutely terrifying was the way that she was killed. She was strangled with a phone cord. Now, this crime was incredibly violent. She'd not only been strangled, she'd also been stabbed so much that she was nearly decapitated. Weirdly, there was no sign of forced entry, so this wasn't a break-in. Whoever did this presumably was let inside the house by Norma. But officers were so confused. They were like, why is this crime so violent? It actually appeared to be a robbery because there the lady's credit cards had been taken, and they couldn't see like an obvious other motive. Then just 10 days later, police got another phone call. I mean, obviously they probably got a lot of phone calls between this, but another related phone call. There was a super similar attack in the same place. So there was another older lady in this gated community, and she was actually a little bit younger actually. She was 66-year-old June Roberts. She'd again not only been strangled with a phone cord, but also bludgeoned with a wine decanter. Honestly, this stuff never ever happened in this area. There was obviously a very dangerous serial killer on the loose. Now, June, bless her, had really tried to put up a fight, but just didn't stand a chance against this horrific intruder. Her cards had also been stolen. So again, this person is stealing from their victims. So all investigators really had to go off was these missing credit cards. So they actually managed to trace the cards and look at the CCTV of the person using those cards, and they spotted a woman. Now, this woman was accompanied by, disturbingly, a small child, and it seemed like the pair of them were like going round shops. She was buying toys for this little child. She was having meals. It was very strange. It wasn't the serial killer that they'd imagined. But the killing spree was far from over, even though police were hot on this person's tail. Again, just days later, another woman was attacked, but this time she survived. This was Dorinda Williams, and she was actually working in an antique shop when a woman burst in and started attacking her. Now, I don't think it was a telephone cord this time, but again, it was like a cable that she tried to grab round her neck. She then fled with a bunch of money out of the till, I believe, and thankfully, Dorinda survived and was able to describe the attacker to the police. She said this seemed to be a young woman with light-coloured hair, and this exactly matched the person that police had seen on the CCTV using those stolen cards. And this matched a woman they'd had their eye on, a local woman called Dana Sue Gray. Frustratingly, they needed to get a search warrant in order to search her house, and in the meantime, while they were getting this in place, another murder was reported. Horrifically, Dora Beebe, who was 87 years old, had also been killed by the same killer again, strangled with a cord, then beaten with an iron. Again, same as the other deaths, this person had stolen her cards, but this time she'd actually withdrawn some money from an ATM with the stolen card, and the ATM has CCTV. This was 100% Dana Sue Gray. When she was questioned, she actually initially denied everything, which is no surprise, but I feel like they literally had so much evidence against her at this point. Eventually, she did get backed into a corner and did admit the killings. I believe she pleaded guilty so that she basically wouldn't get the death penalty. She ended up admitting to everything and basically saying it was fully due to the amount of debt she was in. And she'd been living with her boyfriend at the time, and she'd lost her job because I believe she was a nurse and she'd been doing like dodgy stuff with the medication on the ward. So she'd been sacked and she had no money and she liked to go shopping. She said the debt started just mounting up and she needed the money desperately. But honestly, to me, this does not explain why the deaths were so violent. Like, if you are needing money, you surely just go and rob those people if that's the kind of person you are. I don't understand why she had to A, kill them, and B, kill them in such a horrific way. Does this make sense to you guys? Am I just missing something here? Anyway, she was found guilty and she was sentenced to life without parole.
He murdered his fiancée and then tried to build a time machine so that he could go back in time and undo it. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Anna Repkina. 26-year-old Anna had just got out of a 7-year-long relationship when she decided to sign up to a Russian dating website. She was from Moscow, Russia, and was described as a vivacious, sweet, loving young woman who was just so alive. She enjoyed music, specifically the rock genre, sci-fi movies, and she loved cats. It was on this Russian dating website that she connected with 26-year-old William Hargrove. William lived in a spare room that he rented off of a married couple in Albany, Oregon. He lived quite a reclusive life. He was a little bit of a loner, not having many friends, and he worked as a mechanic. He and Anna clicked, and they discovered that they shared lots in common, including enjoying the same type of music, the sci-fi, the fantasy films, and William was really interested in Russia and Russian culture, so Anna had many stories to tell him. In late 2016, she would take the plunge, jumping onto a plane and travelling almost 5,500 miles from Moscow to Oregon to meet with William. And this visit just enhanced the love and affection that they had developed online. Over the next 10 days, they would get up to all sorts of exciting things. William would take Anna to meet his very few friends, they went sightseeing, and they celebrated the new year together. At the end of Anna's trip in early January 2017, William nervously got down on one knee and presented Anna with a beautiful emerald ring and asked if she would marry him. Being a hopeless romantic and truly believing that she loved this man, Anna gleefully said yes. She did have to fly back to Russia, however by March of that year she was back in Oregon for good, ready to start this next chapter of her life with her fiancé William. He picked her up from the airport, however upon them returning back to the home where he rented the room from that married couple, things quickly began going south. His landlady, 34-year-old Michelle Chavez, was furious at Anna's arrival and kicked them both out the house. William explained to Anna that Michelle was obsessed with him. She had a crush on him and Michelle wanted to date him, but he wasn't interested and she wouldn't take that. So she was only kicking them out because she was being pathetic. And he advised Anna to just ignore her. But Michelle made that difficult. Despite now living in an apartment together in a different part of the town, Michelle would hound both Anna and William. She would send Anna threatening text messages and she would blow up William's phone, pressing him to choose her over Anna. Together the couple did the best that they could to ignore Michelle and put all of that destruction at the back of their mind while they planned their wedding. On the 25th of March 2017, the couple had planned an intimate wedding by the coast. Anna got all dressed up, looking elegant in a beautiful white wedding gown. However, William was stood in the car park screaming down the phone. He would sadly break the news to Anna that the officiant had dropped them in at the last minute and they wouldn't be able to get married that day. Instead of kicking off or breaking down, Anna would just laugh this off, sort of in the sense of, oh, of course this would happen to us. And that just reflects the type of person that she was. Together the couple, both of them still in their wedding clothes, would go for a McDonald's before heading home. Over the next few weeks, Anna began growing suspicious and frustrated with William. He had begun to be secretive around her, he was distant, he was spending hours on the phone where Anna couldn't hear him, making shady phone calls. Anna suspected that the reason for this must be Michelle, but every time she tried to confront William about this, he either gaslit her, brushed her off, or just ignored her. On the 16th of April 2017, William would ask Anna if they wanted to go for a walk out in the woods. Going for a walk in the woods wasn't something that was unusual for William. He would often go into the woods and immerse himself in the fantasy sci-fi world, acting out different things, letting his imagination run wild. Anna, thinking that this would be the perfect opportunity to really sit William down and ask him what's going on, what's changed, agreed to go on the walk. Once the couple were deep inside of the woods, William would tell Anna that he was breaking off the engagement. Devastated, Anna stormed off and William turned around, returning to his car and retrieved a shotgun. He combed through the woods searching for Anna and immediately upon finding her, raised the gun and shot her square in the back of the head, killing her instantly. He would go back to his car and pick up lots of rubbish bags that he had stored in there and dump them around Anna's body. So this included a KFC box, cigarette boxes, sweet wrappers and other bits. He discarded this surrounding Anna, reflecting what he thought of her. He thought of her as nothing more than rubbish. Immediately, William began trying to make a digital alibi. He would text Anna several times from his own phone, knowing that he wasn't going to get a reply. He then withdrew money from her bank account, around about $800, which he used to pay his car insurance, buy cigars and buy Star Wars Lego. When the gravity and the realization of what he had done finally sunk in for William, he began to panic. Over the next couple of days, he was glued to his computer, running off nothing but cigars and pop, scouring the internet, researching how to build a time machine so that he could go back and not commit the murder. He turned to strangers for advice. He was researching different spells, and he tried each and every one of them, but no matter what, he couldn't get them to work. Meanwhile, a caretaker would discover the body of Anna and contacted the police. When they arrived, they retrieved her body alongside the rubbish that was surrounding her, and within this, they found their best piece of evidence. Inside of the bag that had the box of KFC in, there was also a receipt. On this receipt, there was a credit card number, and they were able to trace that credit card number down to a man who was friends with William. When contacted, this man told the police that, yes, he and William had recently ate KFC, but William had also asked to borrow his shotgun so that he could, quote, go up to the woods and blow off some steam. William Hargrove would be brought in for questioning and eventually arrested under suspicion of murder. His motive for murdering Anna was clear. He had been in a 2-year-long affair/relationship with his ex-landlady, Michelle Chavez. This began before Anna was on the scene, while he was engaged to Anna, and even afterwards. It was reported that sometime after committing the murder, he and Michelle met to have relations. Michelle had been promising William that she was going to leave her husband, and as a token of this promise, she gave William her wedding ring, an emerald ring which he turned around and used to propose to Anna with. On the day of their wedding, it wasn't an officiant that William was on the phone to, it was Michelle. There was never an officiant. Michelle ultimately gave him an ultimatum. It was either her or Anna, and William chose her. At his trial in 2019, the defense did try to point the finger at Michelle. However, the jury would eventually convict William Hargrove of the murder of Anna Repkina. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years to serve. However, he is set to have a retrial this year. This came after it was discovered that during his investigation, there was a flawed search warrant and evidence was collected improperly.
This man kidnapped and married a 12-year-old girl by telling her that aliens wanted them to be together. Our story really begins when married couple Marianne and Bob meet this crazy guy named Robert. They became really close. They were like family. Robert became like a second father to their 3 daughters, but he was particularly interested in their daughter Jan. Marianne and Bob thought it was weird and got bad vibes from how close Robert was to their daughter Jan, but they overlooked it because they were friends with Robert and they thought he was a cool guy. This was probably also overlooked because Jan's mother Marianne had a crush on Robert and was actually seduced by him. And around the same time, Marianne's husband Bob, Jan's father, was also seduced by Robert, so both of her parents are having an inappropriate relationship with the man that would go on to kidnap her. Jan was 12 years old in October 1974. Robert was supposed to take her horseback riding, but in reality, he gave her a substance to make her fall asleep and drove them to Mexico. And then Robert started putting together his plan on how he was going to manipulate 12-year-old Jan. When Jan woke up, she was confused, disoriented, she didn't know where she was, how she got there, and she was hearing this weird noise that told her it was a message from aliens. This message from aliens told Jan that she was half alien and she was actually tasked with a mission to save the alien planet that she was actually from. And this task was she would have to have a baby before she turned 16 with Robert. And if she failed, she would be vaporized along with her parents. Her one sister would go blind and the other sister would have to complete the mission. And then Jan sees Robert, who also looks like he's been knocked out. So she wakes him up and Robert tells her, we were driving to go ride horses and then there was a flash of light and a UFO and it was the last thing he remembered. And Jan is only 12 years old and she believes all of it. She 100% believes that she has to have a baby with Robert, an adult, who was like a second father to her. While in Mexico, under Mexico law, where the age of consent at the time was 12 years old, Robert and Jan got legally married. A little over a month after they first, disappeared, Robert was able to be tracked down and arrested, but not before telling Jan to not tell anyone about the aliens or the fact that they were married. Something I haven't told you yet is this entire time, Robert was actually already married to a woman named Gail. And since Robert's now arrested, he has his wife Gail blackmail Jan's parents into dropping the charges by threatening to expose the fact that both of her parents were having an inappropriate relationship with him. And since her father, Bob, was so embarrassed, they agreed to free the man that just kidnapped their 12-year-old daughter. But the bad parenting doesn't stop there. Jan is about 13 years old now. She still believes this alien mission that she has to have a baby with Robert, so she tries to convince her parents to let them be together. So Jan's mother goes to speak with Robert about this, but instead she sleeps with him. And she continued to sleep with the man that essayed and kidnapped her 12-year-old daughter for 8 months. Trying not to judge, but I am, because that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. Shortly after this, Robert kidnapped Jan again so they could run off and be together. And Jan's parents were so scared of being judged that their daughter has been kidnapped by the same man twice that they did not report it for 2 weeks. This time Jan was missing for a handful of months. Robert was eventually caught and arrested and sentenced to only 6 months in a mental facility. As Jan's 16th birthday grew closer, she was terrified that since she didn't have a baby with Robert, that all these awful things were going to happen. She was going to be vaporized. Her parents would also be vaporized. Her sister would go blind. But on her 16th birthday, when none of them happened, she realized that the entire thing was a lie. Jan is a grown woman now. She is really open about her story. She's forgiven her parents. Her parents have forgiven themselves. Her mother even wrote a book. I'm really interested to hear all your guys' thoughts and just how much fault you think should lie on Jan's parents.
The shock you must feel. Oh my god, how do you even remain calm? I think there are certain situations in this world where you cannot be expected to remain calm. This is one of them. December 15th, 1997 was a Monday. Luz Cuevas was at her 2-story house in Philadelphia with her husband, her 2 eldest children, and her 3rd baby, her only daughter, Delimar Vera, who she had just given birth to only 10 days earlier. After dinner, she put the baby down to sleep upstairs in her crib as she started to wind down. Her husband was outside with a friend of his cousins. Her name was Carolyn Correa. Carolyn was at their house because she was having car trouble, so she brought her car over for Luz's husband to look at. Eventually, while the husband was working on the car outside, the friend Carolyn went inside and started making small talk with Luz. The 2 of them find out that they have something pretty big in common. They had both just had a baby. So they start making small talk about that for a little bit when out of nowhere there's a loud bang upstairs and then smoke. A fire had started inside the house. Carolyn, the friend, ran outside, presumably to call the husband in for help, but then she just disappeared. She left. She was gone. Luz, meanwhile, was full mom mode, running around the house trying to find her children to get them out of the house safely because the fire was growing by the second. Every room was getting clouded and filled with smoke. She got her 2 sons and rushed them out of the house, but by the time she got to her baby's room, it was engulfed in flames. Luz could hardly breathe and her face was starting to burn. When she ran into the room, she couldn't find her baby and she eventually ran out of the house, overcome by the smoke and the burns on her face. When the firefighters got there, they also couldn't find any sign of the baby. They were able to put out the fire and listed the official cause and source as an overheated extension cord attached to a space heater. But even after the investigation and the search of the house, authorities were never able to recover the remains of Delimar. And they came to the conclusion that the flames were so strong and so big that they completely incinerated all and any of her remains. And after that day, Luz and her family had to learn to live with the devastating news that baby Delimar was gone. They only had the memories of the 10 days that she was with them to look back on. It was devastating. I mean, what a living nightmare. And that poor mom. When she was told by the firefighters that it was too late, that her baby was gone, she broke down in the middle of the street in tears, screaming for her baby. Throughout the next couple years, the family tried to cope with the loss, but it was too much for the parents to bear, and Luz and her husband ended up getting a divorce. Everyone else kind of accepted their new reality because, I mean, really, what choice did they have? But Luz never did. She insisted that something else had happened to her baby and refused to believe that she disappeared because of that fire. Call it a mom's intuition. She could not and would not accept the fact that her daughter was gone. 6 years passed. It was now January of 2004. January 24th was a Saturday, and Luz had plans to attend a family birthday party. A lot of extended family members were at that party, but one person there stood out to Luz, a 6-year-old little girl who immediately caught her attention. Luz felt an eerie connection to this little girl, and she was convinced and confused when she looked at this little girl and realized that she looked a lot like herself. And then the little girl smiled, and not only did she look like Luz, but her smile had little dimples that looked to be almost exactly like one of her son's smiles. It caught her so off guard when she was staring at that little girl and realized that she saw herself in her. And not only that, but she was 6 years old. Her daughter that she lost 6 years ago would also be 6 years old if she was still around. And as soon as Luz saw who brought that little girl to that party, her stomach sunk. That little girl's mom was none other than Carolyn Correa, the woman who was at her house all those years ago when the fire started and when she lost her daughter. Her mom's intuition had been right all along. Everything clicked for her. Her daughter wasn't gone. Carolyn had stolen her the day in 1997. Somehow, some way, Carolyn had snuck upstairs to the baby's room and stolen her when everyone else was distracted by the flames and the smoke. She managed to sneak out of the house without anyone seeing her and taken that little girl away from her family and into hers to raise her as her own under an entirely different name. Luz knew in that moment, she felt it in her gut. This little girl whose eyes she was staring into was her daughter. But she tried to remain calm. I don't know how, but she understood that she needed a way to prove it. She was certain, but she needed to make sure that she had solid proof. Luz thought the only way to prove this 100% with no questions asked is with DNA proof. How do I get DNA? So she called the little girl over to her. She told her that it looked like she had some gum stuck in her hair and offered to help her with it. But instead, what she was doing was trying to get a couple of strands out of her hair, which she did. She wrapped them in a napkin, put the napkin in a Ziploc baggie, and put that in her purse. She then turned to Angel Cruz, a Pennsylvania state representative, and basically begged him to listen to her theory, because it does sound like a lot, to be fair. Like, hello, my house caught on fire. My daughter was presumed unalive, but I actually think that I just found her. She was kidnapped at 10 days old, and she has been with a kidnapper that she has been calling mom for the last 6 years. Can you please help me? Angel Cruz took her stories as well as the DNA sample, the hair strands, to the district's attorney's office, and when they tested the DNA, it was a match. That was her daughter. And you might be wondering, what in the world would possess someone, cough cough Carolyn, to do such a horrible thing? Also, how did no one notice that she suddenly had a stolen baby? Well, Carolyn was pregnant, maybe. Remember when she was at Luz's house, she had been telling her all about how she also just gave birth and they were making small talk over that. Well, the man that Carolyn was dating at the time also said that he was under the impression that she was pregnant. As far as was she actually pregnant, I don't know, because I don't know if she was showing or if she was just telling people that she was pregnant. But in reality, the entire thing was a lie, but she was telling people that she was pregnant, including what would have been the baby's father. So when she told him and others that she just gave birth at her house, people believed her, I guess, but along with the possibility of her actually being pregnant or just making up the entire thing as part of her plan to kidnap Delimar. It is also important to keep in mind that Carolyn had a history of 1, faking pregnancies, and 2, setting buildings on fire to cover her tracks. She had previously been sentenced to 5 years of probation because she had stolen checks from an old employer and set the building on fire to try and burn any evidence. When Carolyn first was arrested, she tried to excuse what she did by pleading reason of insanity. She also claimed that she didn't act alone. She claimed that Luz's husband gave her the baby, and she said that he was well aware that she took that baby. However, he was never considered a person of interest or at fault for helping Carolyn in any way. Carolyn was found guilty of kidnapping and attempted was sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison in 2005. Now, as far as baby Delimar, she was reunited with her real mother Luz, but understandably so. She had so much to work on because she found out basically at 6 years old that her entire life was fake. Her entire life had been a lie. How do you process that you have been calling your kidnapper mom at all, but let alone at 6 years old? She was moved to a completely different house with a completely different family, introduced to siblings that she didn't even know she had. Her name was changed back to her actual real name, and she needed to get to know all of her family members. It was extremely hard for her, as you can imagine. She has said, quote, "When I was a child, it felt like I had 2 moms. It wasn't until I was 11 or 12 years old that the reality finally set in," end quote. And in regards to finding out the truth from her kidnapper, who she called mom, she has said, quote, "Carolyn has told so many lies. Even if I would have the opportunity to sit down with her, I wouldn't know if I could ever believe her or not. It's just something that I've come to peace with. I'll never know the answers." Surprisingly, out of everyone in the family, Carolyn Carolyn is the one that I remember the least. I think trauma has a way of blocking certain people out of your life, end quote. Today, Delimar has grown up to be a beautiful woman with an inspiring story. She's happily married and living a quiet life, just how she wants it. I will end this video with a quote from her. It says, quote, "You can really get through anything and come out the other side. You can be successful in a happy relationship. Hope is a big thing. When you go through something traumatic, you feel broken. You think you'll never recover. My main message is that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and your trauma doesn't define who you are. You can be whoever you want to be," end quote. Crazy story. What? Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Let me know what your thoughts are on this case. I cannot even imagine. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me today and for listening to Delimar's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. I'm also getting ready to post a pilot. Why can't I say that word? Pilot episode to the podcast. So a little intro video for the pod will be out today. So keep an eye out for that. I'll post it on my story once it's live. But yeah, love you guys so much. I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Craig Price. July 27th, 1987, Craig broke into a home only 2 houses down from his. Even though he had plans to rob the place, he also had plans to kill. He took a knife from the kitchen and stabbed 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer 58 times. The case went cold and Craig thought he was scot-free. A little over 2 years have passed and now 15-year-old Craig is now a freshman in high school. On September 1st, 1989, Craig snuck out of the house in the wee hours of the night while his parents slept to rob a house 4 houses down from his. He entered through an unlocked window but ended up breaking the table as he was coming in. This woke up 39-year-old Joan Heathen and her 2 daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 7-year-old Melissa. Craig grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed Joan 57 times and 62 times for 10-year-old Jennifer. He crushed 7-year-old Melissa's skull with a stool from the kitchen. The scene was so brutal, Craig ended up deeply cutting his own hand. About 2 weeks into the investigation, the detectives decided to look inside of the neighborhood because of how close the killings were. These 2 are the killings. This is Craig's house. The police knew the killer had badly cut himself from a random blood trail and from a piece of a knife that was still stuck inside of one of the victims. So they were looking for anybody with their hand wrapped up until they came across Craig. He was walking from the park. The police asked him, "What happened to your hand?" He said he cut his hand breaking a car window. The police didn't believe him, but they let him go anyway, only to come back that night with a warrant to search his house. The Rhode Island detectives woke up Craig's house. His parents were shocked and confused, not knowing why they're here. They found a bag of bloody knives in Craig's backyard shed. They arrested Craig and his parents followed. Let me just say, Craig was a huge 15-year-old. 5'10", 240 pounds, size 13 shoe. In interrogation, to everybody's surprise, he confesses almost immediately. He not only confesses, he goes into grave details of the crime while his mother is sitting right next to him. But remember, Craig is only 15. He not only can't be charged as an adult, his criminal records will be sealed and they can only hold him until he's 21 years old. This led to law changes in Rhode Island, but it couldn't be applied to Craig's case. They had to think of something to keep him in there. Craig was so happy he told the jury he will make history when he's released. But hold on now, Craig. They said before you can get released, you have to go under psychological evaluation and therapy treatment. Craig declined out of fear of getting thrown into the psych ward. But Rhode Island didn't care. The longer you take, the longer you're going to be in there. On June 8th, 1994, Craig got indicted on 1 count of simple assault and extortion for threatening to injure an officer at the juvenile. We got action now. This is Rhode Island's chance to give him more time. His trial for that charge started in October of 94. Craig is furious because he knows what they're doing. He flew into a rage. He was having all kind of outbursts. But December of that year, he was sentenced to 15 years. But that's not it, y'all. In 1996, he bit the finger of a correctional officer, and that added another year to his sentence. The next year, Craig was placed on trial for criminal contempt because he failed to comply with the psychological evaluation. This added an additional 25 years onto his sentence. In October of 1998, 7 more years were added for assaulting a correctional officer. And between 1999 and 2001, 4 more years were added for verbally and physically assaulting a correctional officer. In 2004, they had to transfer him up out of Rhode Island. He was moved to Florida, which didn't make a difference because in 2009, he was involved in a fight with another inmate, which resulted in a correctional officer getting stabbed. Yes, it was Craig's knife. He was moved to another faculty. On April 4th, 2017, Craig was accused of stabbing a fellow inmate, Joshua Davis, with a 5-inch homemade knife. On January 18th, 2019, he was sentenced to 25 years for that crime. Now just imagine if they would have let him out when he was a juvenile.
I was researching this case, my first thought, how did they come up with the word cannibal? The practice of eating the flesh of one's own species. Isn't that such a scary thing that cannibalism is a word used in cases of human beings, of real people? I'm sick. Before we dive into the story, first of all, stop eating probably if you're eating. Second of all, the reaction on my podcast, I'm a little bit like, who am I? Actually, I am mother, and you guys are my babies, and you're all being so nice. Like, I literally started crying. Don't know how you guys are the nicest people in the world to me. Don't know what I did to deserve so many people being so nice to me, but I love you all so much, and I want to give every single one of you a forehead kiss. So many forehead kisses to come on the podcast. I'm so excited. It's coming very soon, and I could not be more grateful for the reaction that I got. I just don't know. But let's get into today's case because guys, Big Lurch, otherwise known as 25-year-old aspiring rapper Antron Singleton, lived in LA in the year of 2002. He ended up in LA to pursue his dreams of being a rapper, to make connections, talk to the right people, and most importantly, to make music. Antron had a passion for music ever since he was a little boy, raised in Dallas, and throughout his childhood, his passion just grew. He started writing lyrics, putting together songs, but he realized that if he wanted to make it big, a better place for him to try and do that would be LA. So he made the move and picked out his new stage name, Big Lurch. And the type of music that Big Lurch was the most passionate about stood out slightly from other aspiring rappers because of the lyrics. He wasn't writing about girls and money and power. In his lyrics, he was writing about things such as violence, death, and vampires. In one of his songs later on, he even calls out Jeffrey Dahmer and Charles Manson, if that gives you an idea of what he was writing about. It was a bit darker than most songs, I guess you could say. In the year 2000, Big Lurch got into a car accident that would change the trajectory of his life forever. He was rear-ended by a driver, and he suffered catastrophic injuries, including a broken neck that left him paralyzed from the neck down temporarily. He was, as you can imagine, in an excessive amount of pain, unbearable chronic pain, and not only that, but you can also imagine how that kind of accident and injuries would also take a toll on your mental health. He wasn't doing good, and things only got worse when he was released from hospital 2 months after the accident. For 2 months, he had been in hospital receiving every medication in the book to try and cope with the pain. But then he was released, and the pain that he was experiencing perhaps got better, but it was still very much present. And to cope with that, Big Lurch found a guy who could give him substances that could be very dangerous. Specifically, a substance that was once used in the medical field as an anesthetic, but then was banned because of the horrific side effects. It can cause distorted perceptions of reality, paranoia, euphoria, numbness, aggression, and or psychosis. It is also often associated with violent behavior and long-term mental health issues. And although Big Lurch knew that this wasn't a good idea, it's what he decided to take to try and deal with his pain. And sooner than later, he became dependent on it. While attempting to recover from his injuries and consuming this substance on the daily to try and make money, he started not only buying the substance but also selling it. Big Lurch then moves in and becomes roommates with the guy who was providing the substance, the primary seller of the substance. And at times he got in trouble with the law on more than one occasion, all while he was still trying to make music and pursue his dreams with a record label. So that kind of gives you an idea of where Big Lurch was at the time of this case. It kind of sounds like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it? In the house, or should I say apartment, lived the main seller, provider of the substance, a man named Thomas, his girlfriend, 21-year-old Tynesha, their 2 kids, and now Big Lurch. And the dynamic of the house wasn't great. It was a place that you probably wouldn't feel safe in, certainly not a house that children should be raised in. All kinds of illegal things were going on in there. Weapons were everywhere. Random people were in and out all the time. And to top it off, Big Lurch and Tynesha didn't really get along. They were civil, but they were more so coexisting rather than being roommates who got along. April 19th of 2002 was a Friday. Big Lurch was at home with his roommates, Thomas and Tynesha, and I believe a couple other guys were there. The kids were not home at this time, thank God. But the adults were having a little get together consuming said substance that we have been speaking about. I can't say the name of the substance, but just Google Big Lurch and it'll come up. But they were consuming a lot of it for a lot of hours all throughout the night and into the next morning. So now we're into Saturday morning. Everyone's still sitting around the living room until Thomas gets up and leaves. He just left, didn't say anything, he was gone. Tynesha then gets up, she goes to the bathroom. Big Lurch gets up, he follows her. The other guy that was there then decides it's time for him to leave now too. But as he's walking out, he hears Tynesha yelling at Big Lurch to stop. But does he do anything? No, he just leaves. A little bit later on, Tynesha's friend makes her way to Tynesha's apartment, which is also Thomas's and Big Lurch's apartment. And on her way there, she sees a man walking on the street that looks out of it, completely out of it, looks delusional. He's wandering the streets, wearing nothing and covered in blood. When she arrives at Tynesha's apartment, she gets a sick feeling in her stomach when she sees a trail of blood leading to the front door. She opens the door, walks in to look for Tynesha, worried sick about her friend, and she walks into the most gruesome crime scene. If you're eating, I'm being so serious, you probably want to stop. Tynesha was lying on the floor in a pool of her own blood with a sharp weapon still stuck on her shoulder, no longer alive. She had an injury from her chest all the way down to her stomach, completely exposing her insides. Some of her insides had been ripped out. Her intestines and her right lung were no longer inside her body, and those organs that were not in her body anymore had bite marks on them. Human bite marks. Not only that, part of her flesh on her cheek was missing, and that also showed signs of it being chewed off. She literally looked like she had been violently attacked by a wild animal. I have never heard of anything like it, and to know that her friend who cared for her, who loved her, walked in and saw her in that state, it makes me sad and it makes me want to vomit. By this point, police had received multiple 911 calls reporting the same man walking on the street covered in blood that Tynesha's friend had seen. Police show up to arrest the man who, if you had not guessed already, was Big Lurch. He was running up and down the street, barking like a dog, staring up at the sky. Big Lurch was taken to the hospital, and there they found that he had flesh and blood not only all over him, but also inside of him. Human flesh and blood inside of his stomach that did not belong to him. He had eaten parts of his victim. He had eaten parts of Tynesha. I'm sick. According to Big Lurch, he does not remember anything. He remembers being at the apartment having fun with his friends, and the next thing he knew, he woke up in police custody with his lawyer present. He said he had no memory at all of anything that happened in between that time. He was with his friends 1 second, and the next he was sat down by officers informing him in detail of the actions that he took that had violently ended the life of his roommate. He was charged with first-degree murder. And I'm going to stop calling him Big Lurch now. I'm kind of over that name. The approach that Antron and his lawyer were going to try and take to try and get him a lesser sentence was pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. But luckily, the jury didn't buy it. They saw the nature of his crime and how heinous it was, and the fact that it was literally animalistic, and found him guilty. In June of 2003, Antron Singleton was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Now, I did want to mention something important. Tynesha's mother does not believe that Antron was the person who did this to her daughter. In her opinion, she thinks that this was a clear show of strong hatred, and she doesn't believe that being on a substance can create hatred of this magnitude. She doesn't believe that Antron had that much anger inside of him to hurt Tynesha in the way that she was hurt, and also she doesn't think that he had a fair trial. She believes that someone else did this to his daughter and left her there, and then Antron, while on the substance, walked in and perhaps saw a piece of Tynesha's lung on the floor and picked it up to eat it, thinking it was a bit of food laying around, which is very interesting, but I thought that was important to point out. Regardless, I want to end this video by remembering the victim of this horrific case, Tynesha. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, and loved by so many. She will be missed every day, and her memory will be kept alive by everyone who loved her. That was a lot. But that is all I have for this case. Thank you guys if you stuck around to the end. I know it was a very, very hard one to listen to, but I appreciate you guys spending time with me today. And again, I literally cannot thank you guys enough for all the love and support and all the kind messages. It means the world to me. And I'm also like, what is going on? Anyway, I hope that you guys are just as excited about the podcast that I am. I've been saving a story that I have seen requested in my comments for the first episode of the podcast, but I've been so eager to talk about this story because I think it's one that needs to be spoken about often. Anyway, I'll stop yapping now. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day and make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Bridget Harris. Late June 2007, after not seeing her father for 5 years, Bridget's sister Carlene called her and told her he was in town from Liberia and he wanted to see her. Bridget only agreed to come to cuss her sister out for even letting their father in her house in the first place. She took a ferry from Rockaway to Staten Island. When she got there, her niece was sitting on her 55-year-old father's lap, Eric Goodrich. He said he was there to take his grandchildren back with him to Liberia. This made Bridget furious. She argued with her sister, asking her, why would you let him take the girls, knowing what he's done to them? Eric sexually assaulted both of his daughters most of their lives. He told them in Africa, fathers sleep with their daughters to show them that they love them. He might have manipulated Carlene, but Bridget knew it was wrong. So seeing her niece on her father's lap triggered her. She asked her sister, how can you act like everything is okay? And Carlene said, we just move on. Not getting through to her sister, frustrated Bridget stormed out and left. But she knew she could not let her father take her nieces. So on June 28th, 2007, she called her father to come over and talk. He happily agreed, thinking his daughter finally wanted something to do with him. But boy, was he wrong. Eric sat down and got comfortable, and Bridget asked him, do you know why you're here? He said, why? She said, do you remember you forced yourself on me, and the only thing that stopped you was the phone ringing? Eric said, how do you even remember that? Weren't you like 3? No denial, just a casual dismissal. Bridget said, what you did to me was wrong. And Eric said, I never penetrated you, so it wasn't wrong. She's furious at this point, yelling, calling him a liar. Eric stands up and steps towards her, and she pepper sprays him. The two started tussling, and he falls to the ground. But Bridget noticed that he's having a hard time breathing. She ran to get handcuffs to restrain him, but then tried to revive him. When Eric caught his breath, he started screaming. Bridget then stuffed a towel in his mouth and wrapped duct tape around it. She then pulled her father's pants down and castrated him with a scalpel, grabbed her cell phone, called 911, and ran out the door. She told 911 what she did, that her father was still alive and he needed help. After she got off the phone with 911, she called her sister and told her everything. Bridget was on the way to the police station, but Carlene told her, no, come over here. When she got there, her sister seen how in shock she was, and she called the paramedics. They sent Bridget to Richard University Medical Center, the psych ward, for 2.5 months. The medical examiner said Eric died of asphyxiation. He choked on the towel before he got castrated. After being released from the psych ward on August 16, 2007, Bridget was charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. She was held at Rikers Island for 2 years until her trial started in September 2009. At the time of the trial, Bridget looked different. She said she was very depressed. She gained a lot of weight. She was on a lot of medication, and she was eating a lot of junk. But she was mentally ready to stand trial. She said her father molested her from 3 all the way to 17. And if she took his genitals away, he could not hurt nobody else. She said she did not want her nieces to go through what her and her sister went through. And Bridget had an outpour of love. She had so many people on her side. She goes into great detail about her father and a molestation that's too much for TikTok. I might do a longer version for YouTube. But on September 30th, 2009, Bridget was found guilty of a lesser sentence, second-degree manslaughter. The jury said none of them felt that she deserved a murder charge. She was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. She was released after 5 years on August 13th, 2012. Bridget said in her closing statement, I don't think killing him was the answer. I can't believe I actually did it. All I had in mind was to stop him. Listen here, Bridget. I stand with you.
Some people don't just make bad decisions. They literally are the bad decision. No excuses, no bad childhood, just pure, unfiltered cruelty.
Krista stabbed her over 300 times. This was slow torture of a girl who was begging for her life and trying to leave, and that did not seem to affect Krista Pike.
Krista Pike took this to a level so disturbing that she literally became the youngest woman in the United States to be sentenced to death. Search it up, I'm not lying. There is just no justifiable reason for what this girl did. So let's talk about it. Back in 1995, Krista Pike was 18 years old, attending a Jobs Corps training in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's basically like a fresh start start for young people who are trying to get their lives together, but Krista was not there to better herself. She was there to destroy someone else. 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer. She was known to be a really sweet girl and actually there to better herself as a person, but Krista had convinced herself that Colleen was trying to steal her boyfriend to drill shit. Because before Krista ever got to Job Corps, he had a huge crush on Colleen until he obviously moved on to Krista. But in her twisted mind, that was all the justification she needed to literally bully and harass Colleen for weeks until January 12th, 1995. It was Colleen, Krista, Tadero, and another girl. Her name was Shadola Peterson. They signed out of Job Corps and they lured Colleen. They lured Colleen to an isolated area near the University of Tennessee. Colleen honestly thought that they were going there to talk things out, maybe argue a little bit, but not what was about to happen to her. For the next 30 minutes, 30, they tortured this poor girl. Krista and Tadero slashed her, they taunted her, they beat her over and over again while Shadala stood watch. Colleen was literally begging for her life, she was pleading for them just to let her go, but Krista was not having it. She did not intend any mercy on this girl. If anything, she did the opposite. She carved a pentagram, and if you guys don't know, it's this right here. She carved a pentagram into her chest and on her forehead with a box cutter. Tadero and Krista were into spirituality with the devil, and so I guess this was her way of ritually speaking. She then proceeded to her throat 6 times with a box cutter and then chopped up her back with a meat cleaver, beating and kicking her while she's just screaming and begging for them to stop. So in response to that, Krista grabs an asphalt rock and smashes it into her head so many times it just broke into smaller pieces, and then she threw them at her anyway. Seeing that Colleen was literally in her last and final breath, she leaned into her ear and Krista said, "Now it's time to die." Now, if that isn't disturbing enough, Krista kept a piece of Colleen's skull as a souvenir. She took a piece of this girl's skull and carried it around like a trophy. Without any effort of covering their tracks, Krista, Tadero, and Shadala went back to Jobs Corp campus where Krista was bragging all day about what she did. She showed people the piece of skull and she laughed about it and even told her friend every single detail of how she killed Colleen. But at the end of their conversation, she also told her friend, "Be careful not to snitch on me or I'm gonna kill you too." But while all of this was happening, a man had found Colleen's body so disfigured the next morning that he actually thought it was a dead animal. And of course, it didn't take long for police to catch Krista since she literally left breadcrumbs behind her. The sign-out log showed 4 people leaving Job Corps at 8 p.m. and only 3 came back at 10 p.m. That is so sad when you actually think about it. While police were searching through all of Krista's things, they found Colleen's skull fragment right in her jacket pocket. At trial, Krista acted like this was all some big joke. She laughed, she smirked, she showed zero remorse, and the jury just was not having it at all. In literally 2 hours, they found her guilty of first-degree murder, and they sentenced her to death, making her the youngest woman in the U.S. to be handed a death sentence. And get this though, while sitting on death row, Krista has not changed one bit. She didn't reflect, she didn't feel guilty, any of that. Instead, she actually tried to kill another inmate in 2001, only 6 years into her sentence. She had attacked another prisoner by stabbing them with a homemade weapon, but thankfully they did survive. So even behind closed doors, she is still the same cruel, same sadistic person who has no regard for human life. As of today, Krista Pike remains on death row. She's still waiting for her execution date, and honestly, the fact that she's still alive after what she did is baffling. Colleen Slemmer, she didn't get to live past 19. She did not get a second chance. But Krista, she's had nearly 30 years of extra years to breathe, eat, and just exist. It's not fair. I hope that Colleen is resting well, and may we never forget just how evil and senseless this crime really was. Y'all stay safe out there.